Hey y'all, this is episode number 7. It is tax day, so we're talking about the concept of taxation is theft and the philosophy behind that mindset. An episode about the New York will be coming soon, but I figured what better day to talk about taxes than tax day. Thank you again to Flavor Aid for the intro music you're about to hear. They've got their EP release party on May 31st here at Stubbs in Austin, Texas. And their new single, Ghostin' You, is out on Spotify and all streaming services. What's up, y'all? This is the Sovereign Individual Podcast. My name is Eric Guerra, and I am your host on this show, and today is tax day. The worst day of the year for many of us within the liberty movement or libertarianism in general. So I figured what better day to talk about the idea behind taxation is theft. So that's probably something that you've seen or maybe heard. If you're at all familiar with the liberty movement or anybody who's a libertarian, you've probably definitely heard this at some point. If not, you've possibly maybe seen it on social media. It's like a hashtag on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. It's become a more common sight, I think, as the liberty movement has kind of grown and parts of it have become more mainstream. It's not solely a sentiment of the liberty movement. There are those kind of within the conservative or larger right-wing movement that have kind of taken up that saying as well, and we'll throw out the taxation is theft saying here and there, but it's largely based in the liberty movement, and kind of the idea was born out of there. And so I kind of just wanted to go over it a little bit, kind of the philosophy behind it, how it came to be. And I mean, honestly, taxation is extortion would be more suited to the exact sentiment of what it is that the liberty movement is talking about, but that doesn't quite roll off the tongue like taxation is theft does. So that's earned the saying. That's the one that's become popularized, but extortion is probably the better way of putting it. And so we're just going to kind of dive in and look at just from a philosophical standpoint taxation, and it's not going to be a super deep dive. There'll be times where I'll have people on where we can kind of dive into this a little bit more and have some good back and forth behind it. Again, this is just kind of to introduce the ideas of the liberty movement and libertarianism in general to folks, and kind of the logic and the philosophy and the reasoning behind it. So we're not going to get too deep into the weeds on this, just kind of keep it generalized and gives people an idea of what the hell these crazy libertarians are talking about when they're screaming about taxes and taxation being theft and all that kind of stuff. So we'll just start off. So where does it come from? What is the meaning behind this idea of taxation is theft? Why is it something that is continually talked about by people on within the liberty movement and on the side of liberty or libertarianism? So kind of the basis of it is the idea behind taxation and why it is considered theft is if any other person or entity were to conduct this activity, you would call it extortion. If somebody came to you and said, I'm going to take 15% of every dollar that you make, and if you refuse, I'm going to lock you in a cage. And if you refuse to go in the cage, I'm going to kill you. That person would be a criminal. That person would be charged with extortion. They're threatening kidnapping. They're threatening murder. All for the fact that you would refuse to give them your money. But magically, if the government behaves in this manner, it's not considered criminal. It's considered legal, and it's considered okay. And so the idea behind it and where the liberty movement comes at it from is it's not voluntary, and it's forced coercion, forced extortion, and by that logic, it's therefore theft. It's being stolen from you. You don't have a choice in the matter without, risking health or freedom on the outside. And it kind of logically, and when you're talking about this with somebody and discussing why this is theft, there's a lot of reasons that people will give for why it's not, or why taxes should exist, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit. But one of the things that you come across is when you say, okay, so if the government took 100% of your income, that would be wrong, right? And most people will agree, yeah, that's slavery. They're taking everything. You're working and you're not seeing any fruits of your labor. You don't have the self-ownership of your labor at that point, and you're working and not receiving payment. That's the definition of slavery, indentured servitude, whatever you want to call it. Okay, cool. So 100% isn't okay. So at what percentage point is it not slavery? 20%? 50%? 60? 75? 80? 90? Is it only 100% where it's slavery? Because that's kind of the logical fallacy that you fall into when you start making the argument that taxation is not theft, or it's not being stolen from you, is okay at what percentage point? And then somebody has to arbitrarily pick what percentage point it's okay to have that amount taken from you without a say in the matter and without you consenting to it being taken from you. So that's a big part of it, and a part that is really difficult for a lot of people to counter with is, well, what arbitrary number of percentage are you going to pick that does not constitute slavery? And then again, this is sovereign individual podcast. The idea of being a sovereign individual, the idea of self-ownership, of property rights being human rights. And as I talked about in the opening, the most important piece of property that you own is you, yourself, your body, your thoughts, your words, your actions. Well, a big part of that property, of that self-ownership of yourself, is labor. And it's interesting because it's not viewed in the same way by most people on a philosophical level. They don't view their labor as a part of their property, and they don't view their labor in the same way that you would with like land that you own or a house or something. It's a lot easier to get this idea across when you're talking about property taxes, and you equate property taxes to basically you paying rent on what you own. That the government, even once you've paid off your house, when you no longer have a mortgage, if you don't pay this rent essentially to the government, they will come and take it away from you. That's a far easier concept for people to grasp and understand and to get on board with as to why property taxes are rent to the government and why they're crap, and how it's insane that the government can come and take your house and your property away from you that you already own, that you've already paid for, that is completely yours, because you don't pay them a certain amount of money, that they can hike up the property taxes on you to the point where you can no longer afford to live in a house that you own, that you've lived in for decades, because they've decided to increase what you owe them for the property that you own. That's a much easier concept for people to grasp onto than the idea of your labor is yours. Your labor, you own that. That's yours. The fruits of it are yours, and the government has no claim to that either. No government, no person, nobody has a claim to your labor. And for whatever reason, that's a tougher philosophical concept to get across to people outside of the liberty movement, who don't necessarily automatically view taxation as a form of theft. And the idea of your labor being yours is a concept that's a little bit tougher to broach in initial conversations, and for whatever reason it seems to be one that people can have a difficult time wrapping their heads around when it comes to their labor. I don't really quite understand why. That one's never really made sense to me, other than I think it's just the idea of income taxes become so ingrained that people, I don't know, I don't get it. It's a weird one for me, and but that's a big part of this. That's where this comes from, is the idea that that's yours, that's your work that you put into something, and the fruits of your labor belong to nobody else, certainly not the government. And they certainly shouldn't be able to take it from you before you've even touched it. And then at the end of the year, decide, oh, we took too much from you, we stole too much from you, we're going to give you some of it back. It's really frustrating, and really, you want to rile up some people on the liberty movement, or some libertarians. Get them a few beers deep and talking about taxation. So let's just go over real quick some of the arguments that people will use for justifying taxation. Trust me, I hear a lot of them. As an outspoken libertarian, you run into people a lot. Then this tends to be a topic that comes up quite frequently. So let's see. Easily the most common one, easily the one that is always countered with, because it's really easy morally and logically to argue how it's theft, how it's extortion, how if any other entity was doing this, it would be criminal. So it's really easy to get to that point, and a lot of times the deflection or the response or the counter to it is just, well, that's the price we pay to live in a society. It's part of the quote unquote social contract that we all sign. First of all, I didn't sign it. Nobody signed it, so I don't feel beholden to some arbitrary, imaginary social contract rather. It's a social construct too, but some social contract that supposedly exists and rules over all of us. So that's, I don't believe in the social contract. But the price we pay to live in a society, cool motive, still extortion. And so if that's going to be your approach to it, that's fine if you feel that way, and if that's how you justify that money is being taken from you without your consent. If you're retroactively consenting and saying, well, I am okay with this because that's the price we pay to live in a society, cool, totally fine. That's why I want to move towards a libertarian society, a libertarian form of government, because if you and your community and the group of people that you want to live with want to abide by those standards, and you view that as an okay thing, and that's part of living in that society that you have formed together, go ahead, have at it. But you don't get to bring that on me. I don't agree with that. I don't know. I view it as theft, and I view it as stealing, and I should not be subjected to it just because you have a different moral justification for it, and you think that there's some better claim to my money and the fruits of my labor that justify it being taken from me. You don't get to force that on me, and especially not with the threat of violence, and especially not if you're going to take that money from me without my having a choice in it, and then you're going to use it to bring violence upon individuals all throughout the world and kill them. I can't tell you how sick and tired I am of my tax money being stolen from me and then being used to bomb brown people all over the world. The sheer amount of women and children that have been murdered with United States taxpayer money in the past 2 decades is sickening and awful. And you really want to talk about why taxation pisses me off the way that it does, is because my money can be stolen from me and then used to do something I wholeheartedly disagree with, and I have no say in the matter. No say. Oh, sure, you can vote, but all these assholes are all gonna keep doing the same exact wars that we have been doing. Obama started 6 more than Bush was in. Obama dropped more bombs than anybody ever had, but then now we got Trump, and he's dropped more bombs than Obama did in any one of his greatest years of dropping bombs. So there isn't a difference when it comes to that, and when it comes to who you're voting in. It's just they're gonna steal your money from you and use it as they see fit, and that's awful. That's a big reason why I'm so anti-taxation. Another argument for it: we need a social safety net, to help out our fellow man, to help out our fellow person in the community. We need to make sure that there's the ability of them to be taken care of. Very good sentiment, very understandable. Again, I'll go back to what I was just saying. Not even remotely what the majority of taxation is stolen for to use, but okay, that's fine. When you're talking about a social safety net, or you're talking about the social welfare of a country, or of a community, or of a people, it comes down to trust. Who do you trust to take care of the situation? Who do you trust to handle that type of responsibility? And for me, and for most people in the liberty movement and libertarianism in general, the answer is never going to be the government. You talk about an entity that has abhorrently failed at most everything it's ever done. Again, I've said it before. The best things that the government's best at killing people. It's best at stealing your money, taxation. It's best at it's okay for now at writing checks, for the time being, before we go bankrupt. And it's really good at spending your hard-earned money. It's really good at finding ways to spend your money and increase the money that it's spending, and then by proxy having to increase the amount of money that they have to take from you. But those are the main things that it's really good at. And then it's really, really good at screwing up everything it touches. So, no, I don't feel that the government is the best to handle the social safety net. I'd much rather trust it to private 501c charities, private entities, religious groups, community groups, all that kind of stuff, where the government just gets in the way of those kinds of people. Can't tell you how many stories you read about churches being fined for allowing homeless to sleep on there, or police going to try to shut down people feeding homeless people. The state has a whole lot to worry about, but the idea of showing a better way of taking care of its people seems to be high on its list of things that it needs to combat against. And so, no, I don't trust the government to handle that kind of thing, and I'd much rather be able to choose how the money is going to be spent. So that kind of brings me into the third point, the third argument that I was going to go over, is other people need it more. And that's a fair thing to say as well. We have poverty in the United States, very different kind compared to most of the rest of the world. If you make more than, I believe, $34,000 a year, you're in the top 1% of the world. So a vast majority of the United States would be considered in the 1% of the world. So the idea that other people need it more is very real within the borders of the United States, but it's kind of something you do also have to take it in context as to how good you have it here, just by way of living in the United States. And so, other people may need it more, and we've never had a better time in the history of humanity to be able to facilitate the transfer of that money from people who have to people who need than we have right now. The internet has allowed for an amazing amount of ways people can be charitable with their money. GoFundMe, I mean, look at the good that has been able to be done by that website. And imagine how much more good could be done if instead of having to worry about their money being stolen by the government, people were able to put that money to use towards, different campaigns on GoFundMe and helping different people out in different ways. And not everybody would do that, and that's fine. It's your money. You get to choose what you want to do with it. But it's there's a everything I think would be better suited by community working to help people and to help people within their community and making sure people are taken care of than the government ever would be able to. The government's just going to inflate a program. It's going to waste within the program, and it's going to misuse your hard-earned money, and there's no accountability for it when it comes to this bureaucracy. And that's where the majority of any sort of social safety net, quote-unquote, stuff is going to be occurring within bureaucrat, laden halls, within the bureaucracy, surrounded by red tape, and there's no accountability for those people and for people in those positions. At least with a GoFundMe or a private entity, there's accountability. There's that story, that girl and that gentleman hatched up that story about him lending his last $20 so she could get gas, and started a GoFundMe, and they raised like $400,000, and then it was saying that the girl and her boyfriend who set up the campaign weren't going to give the homeless guy the money because they thought he would use it on drugs. And then it turns out that the guy wasn't actually homeless, and they just concocted the scheme together. And so she's now going to be going to jail for 4 years. Accountability. There's accountability there that you don't get when you're dealing with bureaucracy. So, yeah, it's a much better form of accountability, and it's again, we're at this unique time in human history where we're so interconnected. This isn't even just within the United States. I mean, you have the ability to donate to people building wells in Africa, and to groups building wells in Africa. There's I can't think of the website right now, but it's basically you basically front money for somebody. I believe this was in Africa as well. It might have been India, to basically be able to get their farm up and going off the ground, and then they eventually pay you back with a little bit of interest, but it's only like $25 American. It's able to change their life, and they're able to start making a living off of that, and be able to grow food and take care of themselves. So again, this is a time in history where it's never been easier for people to be able to engage like that. And so who do I trust? I'm going to trust non-bureaucrats and non-government that can be held accountable for when they vastly screw something up. There's no accountability on the government. They just, we just need more money. We're going to throw more money at the problem. That'll solve it. And all that means is more money taken from us. So those are just kind of some of the arguments that are made for taxes. Again, it's not going to be a super deep dive. I'm sure at some point I'll have somebody on that doesn't feel this way, and we can kind of get into more and get into some back and forth. I just kind of wanted to describe the philosophy behind it. Another quick thing to just go over is this whole idea of corporate taxes. I know that's a stick up the Democratic Party's butt right now, that they're all about, they love toting out all kinds of stuff about, that corporations need to pay their fair share, and regardless of the fact that corporations pay payroll taxes, so they're already paying taxes on every employee that they have. They love to tout that Amazon paid $0 in taxes last year. Yeah, well, Amazon operated at a loss for 13 years as well. Not too concerned that they may be paying $0 in taxes currently, when they also employ 500,000 people in the United States. They're doing far more good than the government would do with any money that they stole from Amazon. Amazon's doing far more for the community, for the society, and for America as a whole than the government would ever do with that money that they would steal from them in the form of corporate taxation. So yeah, I'm not too butthurt that Amazon paid $0 in taxes. That's less money that could fund less bombs that are going to be dropped on innocent people around the world. So yeah, I'm not too broken-hearted about that. And then the whole idea, I mean, just ask California how taxing the crap out of businesses work. It's working out great for the state of Texas because they're all coming here. But if you want to really do some damage to your economy, increase taxation on corporations. See what happens. So they're not going to stay here, and they're going to take those jobs elsewhere. So it's really just a poor economic look at things to say that, oh, corporations need to pay their fair share, we need to tax them more, and yada yada yada, when you've got an entity that's run up over $20 trillion in debt. They're running on a $4 trillion budget, which in this fiscal year is going to be a $1 trillion deficit. And you want to tell me that they should be getting more money? You out of your mind? That's insane. That's like giving a college kid a credit card after he's already maxed out 17 of them. Yeah, just give him another one. He'll probably get it right this time. Goodness gracious. Yeah, so not at all upset about the fact that the company that does so much good and provides so many jobs and opportunities for people isn't contributing to this black hole of a government that just sucks in money and sucks in anything that it can get its hands on and ruins it. Again, it comes down to trust. Who do you trust? The government's never going to be the answer for me. Never. I don't trust them with anything. Anything. Especially when it comes to my life. Excuse me, sorry about that. Alright, so here's the fun thing. Question that always comes up, and this will be where we end this episode today. Well, Eric, if there's no taxes, how do we pay for government? You don't, is the answer that I love to give, but I realize that's not where most people are. Most people aren't going to necessarily fall into the boat that I am of not wanting to see government exist at all, and I understand that, and I recognize that, and I appreciate it. Again, like I described earlier on in the podcast, I want us to be on a train towards more freedom and less government, and you're fine to get off wherever you feel that the government is small enough. For me, that's going to be when there's no government, or if you so vehemently believe in that there can be a good government, a good form of government, a form of government that doesn't murder and doesn't steal excessively and doesn't bring harm into the world, and can exist and thrive and be able to do what it's supposed to do without stealing from everybody that lives within its bounds. Build that government then. I would be more than happy to eat crow if such an entity could exist. So, anyway, let's get back to so how do we pay for government then? If we're gonna get rid of the income tax, and if we're gonna get rid of property taxes like the Libertarian Party wants to, how do you pay for government? And I mean, again, just to be clear to all my fellow libertarians who might be listening, I am completely anti-taxation. I want them all to be gone. However, just speaking in a realistic point of view, and from what we're talking about right here, how do you pay for government? Well, sales tax, consumption tax would be one way of doing it. That offers folks the ability to opt out if they so choose, and they want to just straight up barter for things, or do things kind of in that way where they make they make a bunch of things for themselves. It's not really feasible, It's really difficult. That's why the whole monetary system exists now, because it's really hard to work on a strictly barter system. But it would offer that ability to remain outside of the system and not have to pay taxes if you so choose. The other thing with sales and consumption tax, and what I'll say to a lot of people, again, not believing it should exist, but I can speak on the validity of this way, would be at least a step in the right direction. Would be there's no loopholes when it comes to a sales tax and a consumption tax. If you're purchasing things, then you're paying. You don't have millionaires and billionaires being able to not pay any taxes at all because of they're able to afford people who can find the loopholes for them to do that, or they have the means to hold their assets offshore, or however they do it. And again, I have no problem with those people doing that. I hope to one day be at a point where I can afford to do that as well and not have the government steal any money from me. That would be awesome. So again, I hold no issue with those types of people either. I wouldn't want my money. I don't want my money stolen from me now, and I certainly wouldn't want my money stolen from me if I was making as much as those individuals. So, but if you're operating strictly based on a sales and consumption tax, that whole idea of, well, there's a bunch of people who are making the most who aren't paying their fair share. Well, they're going to be paying because they have to buy stuff. So, that could be an argument that would appease those kind of people. And so, how else do you pay for government? Back to the whole idea, crowdsource it. There was that GoFundMe that started to raise money to build the wall, and it became, a funny meme that was going around. People were laughing about it. People were joking about it. I know a lot of people on the left were like, "Yeah, good, fine, whatever. Let them pay for it." And I was just like, "Yes, you're kind of getting it. Let the people who want to pay for it pay for it." I mean, yes, I would absolutely be okay with that. If you want to give your hard-earned money towards building a wall on the southern border because that's what you believe in, then you go and you give to that crowdsourcing that the government's doing for that wall. If you really, really, truly believe that Planned Parenthood needs to exist, and that it needs to be something that is available in every state and every city, and everybody should have access to it, go give to that crowdsourcing to fund it. Like, that's now your money isn't going to be stolen from you to build a wall that you don't believe in, and their money isn't going to be stolen from them to fund Planned Parenthood when they don't believe in it. And my money's not going to be stolen to bomb brown people half the world away when I don't believe in that. And you could just pay for what you believe in, and you can pay for what you support. And the market's going to determine whether or not something is going to exist. And it's going to be a beautiful thing. And then another way is just bring the government back in line. Get it back to the Constitution. Get it to have a freaking balanced budget. At the minimum, no, actually, it needs to be less than. Get it to have a surplus. It's the only way this country is gonna survive, and we may be past the point of no return. I don't know. I really don't know at what point, how many trillions of dollars a country can be in debt before people just say screw the dollar. And honestly, if the world wasn't so dependent on the United States economy, it would have happened already, and they would have said to hell with the dollar. We're not messing around with it anymore. The only fact I think that's keeping the United States afloat and keeping the rest of the world from not just getting rid of the dollar entirely is that it would pretty much mean a huge economic collapse on a global scale, and nobody wants to see that. And then we also go and murder and bomb anybody who tries to get off the dollar as well. Just ask Gaddafi. But bringing the government back in line, get it under control. Dave Smith, he's a great podcaster. He's a stand-up comedian. He said it on his show. We started as the smallest government in world history, and we've become the largest government in world history. And that's a huge failure, and it's a huge reason behind all of the problems that we're having currently. if you look back at how this country has started to move in a direction that isn't sustainable, isn't good for the rest of the world. It's been disastrous for most of the rest of the world who've suffered through American imperialism. That's been the biggest thing. We become an empire, expanded in an imperial fashion, and through that expansion, domestically, our government has expanded, and it's touching all these parts of life that it doesn't need to be touching, and stealing more from you in different ways, mind you, not just straight up income tax. They find all kinds of any sort of licensing fee, tariffs, regulatory taxes. These are all different ways of stealing from you, because it's gotten so large and so out of control. They have to keep inventing new and more outside the box ways to steal from you, because they know that we would not stand for a dramatic increase in the amount of income taxes and or property tax. I mean, they do a lot with property taxes. They get away with quite a lot, but they know there's only so far that they can go, so they have to invent new ways to take that money from you. So we need to bring it back in line, get the government back to what it's supposed to do, get it back to only what's outlined in the Constitution. Again, that's the way I want the train moving. I would love to see a world, and I think that technology will offer us a world where we don't have to have the existence of a state. But that's me, that's what I want, that's my dream, not necessarily everybody else's. But at the bare minimum, I think we can all agree that the path we're heading down is a path that leads to assured destruction, at least at the bare minimum, a really horrible, awful economic downturn, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Great Depression. So on this tax day, I just ask you to remember that we have a government that's out of control. It can only exist by stealing from you and taking your money from you, and that if any other entity were to act in the same way, we would call them a criminal organization, and we would seek to press charges against them, have them arrested, have them thrown in jail. But because it's this entity called the government, it's viewed as okay. And if you want to morally justify it in some of the ways that I laid out earlier, and some of the arguments I hear, that's fine. But just know that the rest of us are going to be sitting here, and we fully believe that it's extortion, and we're going to be fighting to make sure that people are not having their labor and the fruits of their labor taken from them without their consent. So that's the end of this podcast here on Tax Day 2019. Thank you so much for listening. You are a sovereign individual. I'm a sovereign individual. And labor is part of your property. And nobody has a claim to that labor without your consent. Thanks, y'all.